We are 5 days away from the trade deadline on August 2nd. So, for today's Friday Farm Report, what I want to do is evaluate the Mets' prospect capital heading into the deadline. Who could be moved to add the finishing pieces to this Mets roster?
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, looking at the Mets prospect capital heading into the deadline, I want to start with the position players because I think this is where the Mets really have their main top tier chips that can get a big deal done, whether it's trading for Wilson Contreras and David Robertson, whether it's a deal like we talked about earlier this week in our Locked On crossover with the Orioles, if it's Jorge Lopez and Trey Mancini, maybe it's something we're not even thinking about. Maybe it's the Josh Bell trade that seemingly is off the table, but you never know if they might re-engage. There's a lot of different things the Mets might try to do, and they're going to need at least one really big piece that goes out to get a deal done. You look at the Mets farm system, and obviously the two crown jewels are Francisco Alvarez and Brett Baty, but almost all reports have said that they are off the table in any trades. You know, if there was a Juan Soto trade that would have happened, yeah, they would have been in there, but it seems like that is not going to happen as well. So really what it comes down to is Ronny Mauricio, Alex Ramirez, and Mark Vientos. And if you go to MLB.com's top 30 rankings, that's numbers 3 through 5 in the Mets system in that order. Mauricio, Ramirez, Vientos. Now, looking at these guys as trade chips, the one that I would be most willing to deal, if this was my decision, is Ryan Mauricio, who's actually the third best prospect in the Mets system. But you look at his profile, and I've talked about him a bunch if you've been listening to this show, but there's such a wide range of outcomes here. You know, I actually went out and I saw each level of the Mets farm system, you know, high A, double A, triple A earlier this summer. And if you remember those episodes, Mauricio was the guy that blew me away the most in person because he had a great game when I saw him. He's 21 years old. He's just a huge kid, big athletic body. You can see why some scouts will drool over this guy. But you look at his numbers this season, he's hitting 244, 281 on base, 463 slugging. The good thing is he has 16 home runs. And I kind of talked about a comp to a Joey Gallo when I saw him, in that he's not going to be this guy that, you know, does a lot other than the three true outcomes: home runs, walks, strikeouts. But, well, actually, that's the problem. He doesn't have the walks in his game yet. To reach Joey Gallo, he needs the walks because right now his walk percentage is 4.4%. If he can get that plate discipline, he could make it. But you look at him striking out 25% of the time, not getting on base even at a 300 clip. And as great as that power is, you got to wonder if he's going to give you competitive at-bats, especially the higher he climbs in the minor leagues. So, yeah, really good prospect. I think there's some scouts that'll love him, but there's going to be a lot of scouts that look at his numbers, look at his swing, see the lack of discipline, see that he's a real free swinger and might not be interested, and maybe he's not even a good enough prospect to get that big deal done. So, if that's the case, is an Alex Ramirez a prospect that teams are going to be more interested in? Honestly, considering what he's done this year, I think so, because you're talking about a 19-year-old who was great in low A, 284 hitter, 359 on base, 443 slugging, 6 home runs, 17 stolen bases. I talk about WRC plus a lot, measuring hitters based on a league average of 100. That's a 131 WRC plus in low A for Ramirez, so 31% better than the league average hitter at a young age. Gets promoted, now he's in high A, hitting 281 in high A, 343 on base, 469 slugging, and that's in 16 games with the 117 WRC plus, playing against competition that's a lot older than him. This is a potential 5-tool center fielder. Considering the fact the Mets just dealt Pete Crow Armstrong, if you're talking about my rankings of untouchables, I did a podcast on that, I think 2 weeks ago now, for a Friday Farm Report, And Alex Ramirez was right there for me with Beatty and Alvarez. I don't really want to see the Mets deal this guy. I think that if he's the one piece you have to deal to get the trade that's going to take this Mets team over the top as a World Series contender, it's a poison pill you probably have to swallow, but not one that I'd be really comfortable with considering his profile, considering what the Mets have in their farm system. He's a guy I'd hang on to here. That leads you to Mark Vientos. And the more and more I think about this, the more it's going to go against what I really want to see happen, because I look at Mark Vientos and he's just this prospect that I've liked for a really long time. I love the home run profile. And I feel like there is a world here where in the second half he could impact the Mets. And even next year, he could really impact the Mets as a DH. The problem is, I just went through why you wouldn't want to trade Ramirez and why Mauricio might not have as much value as a Vientos to some teams, because they're going to see Mark Vientos say, you know what, he's a safer bet for sure. I mean, that's guaranteed, honestly. Look at these two guys. And as much as, you want to talk about the ceiling of Mauricio and compare that to Vientos, who's kind of positionless, maybe first base is his future home at the big league level, but he could just be a DH. At the same time, just played in the futures game. The last 90 days in AAA, the highest level of the minors, he's hitting 294, 372 on base, 578 slugging, 17 home runs, 44 RBIs, a 951 OPS. His entire season numbers are still good even after just a dreadful first month of the season. Altogether, still hitting 264, 345 on base, 517 slugging with 18 home runs, 126 WRC plus, which again measures hitters based on that league average 100, so 26% better than a league average hitter. And if you go back to 2021, he has 43 home runs in 154 games, I believe. It's a lot of long balls, and that's what people love. So obviously, there's still some holes in his game defensively. He strikes out over 30% of the time, but he walks over 10% of the time this year, had a walk rate even higher than that last year. I think teams will value Vientos maybe more than any of the available position players the Mets could deal. So he might be the guy that gets you Wilson Contreras and David Robertson. That could be the piece that has to go, which would be unfortunate, because at the same time, if you're talking about Contreras maybe complementing a Vogelback as the right-handed part of a DH platoon, you look at what Vientos has done against lefties this year. 326 hitter, 375 on base, 721 slugging, 10 of his 18 home runs have come against left-handed pitching. I still see that as an option for the Mets. I still see that as a potential down the stretch where you go to a Mark Vientos to split time of Vogelback, and maybe that's it. So you got to decide if Vientos is more valuable in a trade to get a rental that puts you over the top potentially here, or if you rather hang on to him and potentially have the guy for the next 6 years, on a cheap contract, giving you a lot of value potentially. It just depends on what they think of him as a hitter. If they deal him, obviously they believe that the holes in his swing will get exposed at the big league level. Now, you go beyond that when it comes to position players. I don't know if there's anything that's going to really get a deal done. These are pieces left here that are really secondary, if not tertiary pieces in a trade. I just don't see them headlining any package. Maybe a Brandon Drury type trade, a rental that's not quite as high end as a Contreras Robertson package. So maybe you can see that if it's a Khalil Lee and a Nick Plummer as guys that, maybe a Reds team values for whatever reason. But you look at their numbers this year in AAA, 705 OPS for Lee, 676 OPS for Plummer, 24 and 25 years old respectively. Yeah, there's 7 and 8 in the Mets system according to MLB.com, but I think there's real fourth outfielder risk with both of these guys. And I don't know if there's a team out there that's looking at them and saying, yeah, we really need this prospect. They might even prefer one of the Mets' lower level prospects that still has years to be developed, and maybe they think they can take a ball of clay and mold them into something better in 3 years than what they're going to get in these guys who theoretically should be big league ready right now, but they haven't been thriving in AAA, and so that leaves them without much trade value, in my opinion. Now, you go beyond that, Simone Juan would definitely get a lot of interest, but this was the Mets' top international free agent signing this offseason. I really don't see him moving. You got Jalen Palmer, who I think has pretty much tanked all of his trade value. Number 14, according to MLB.com right now. But, I mean, if they updated that, I think he would drop even further. He's just been, unfortunately, abysmal since getting promoted to high A last year. Had a great season in low A in 2021, but in high A, he's been hitting 180 consistently since last season. So I don't see that. He's also striking out at a nearly 40% clip down there. So as he's gotten to more advanced pitching, he's been exposed. So I don't know if he gets anything on the market other than maybe a throw in a trade. You got Carlos Cortez. I don't know who it was. And I don't know why I held on to this. And I don't remember if it was Twitter or YouTube comments, but at some point, someone was having an argument with me that Carlos Cortez was the next Jeff McNeil. I said, look at Jeff McNeil's minor league numbers. Let's come back to reality a little bit. And this isn't to bash Carlos Cortez. He's a 25-year-old utility infielder. Maybe one day he makes it to the big leagues in that type of a role. But this season in Double-A, hitting 258, 335 on base, 429 slugging in 50 games, 108 WRC plus. In Triple-A, a 168 hitter, 231 on base, 234 slugging, a 24 WRC plus, which is 76% worse than a league average hitter at that level. And he's 25 already. What are you getting for him? And it just kind of goes down the line when it comes to the Mets prospects. You got JT Schwartz, 19 at MLB.com, 22 years old, 4th round pick last year. Not having a bad year in high A, but not really doing too much to impress. 259 hitter, 346 on base, but only a 384 slugging percentage, only 4 home runs. And at 22 years old, you would think that he could maybe thrive in that league. But even 100 WRC plus, I just don't know if he has much value either. Again, maybe a throw in, but not a prospect that's going to move the needle. You got Hayden Sanger and Nick Mayer, 2 glove first catchers. Those guys can usually get you a little bit of something. Again, not really a primary piece, but could you see like a Hayden Sanger and I don't know, I guess maybe we'll talk about the pitchers in a minute, but maybe Sanger and a pitching prospect being able to get you a David Robertson on his own or a Michael Fulmer. I could see it. Teams are always looking for those types of catchers that could be future backups. So there's probably more value there than some of these hitters that aren't doing much and, positionally don't bring as much value as a catcher would. Although offensively, there's not much there with either of those guys. Now, the last 2 prospects I wanted to mention to kind of close out as I really dove through the top 30 and tried to find the value when it came to position players that the Mets could deal. It's Jake Mangum and Carlos Rincon, but both of them have been hurt. Both of them are older prospects. Mangum 26, Rincon 24. They got Rincon last year in the, oh my God, I'm picturing it. Billy McKinney. I'm picturing his face. What was the guy's name? Yeah, if you remember, McKinney had a glorious run as a Mets legend of a couple of weeks, and then the Mets were somehow able to get something for him. But what they got was Rincon, and he had a good season last year. This year, though, 597 OPS in 30 games at AAA. A guy that might not even be in the Mets system next year. Mangum, on the other hand, I do know that the Mets have spoken very highly of him, a potential 4th outfielder. I really like him, but he's been hurt for a while. As I said, he got hurt in the middle of June once he got promoted up to AAA. I think they could see him in the same role that Travis Jankowski has this season next year. And because of that, I don't think as a 26-year-old prospect, he's going to get you enough that's worth giving up on that. I think he's more valuable to the Mets than he would be in any trade. But that kind of recaps the position players that could be on the move. Alvarez ain't going anywhere. Mauricio, Ramirez, and Vientos are the 3 that can move the needle. I think Khalil Lee and Nick Plummer are absolutely on the table. But beyond that, there just isn't much that could be moved here at the deadline. Next, though, I want to talk about the arms that could move. The Mets maybe have a better chance of getting some deals done by trading some pitching, which is unfortunate because that's what they've been doing for really the last 5 years now. Before we get to that, welcome to the world of sports cards reimagined with the Sports Card Investor app. It's the hobby's most powerful resource where you can quickly check the value of your favorite cards, find great deals, and profit from the hobby you love. It's available completely free in the Google Play and Apple App Store. The Sports Card Investor app is a must-have for baseball fans where you can easily browse 630,000 cards from every sport with hundreds more added each week. Check the latest values for your favorite cards with 7-day or 30-day charts. Find the best prices and buy directly through the app with their eBay deals feature. Whether you're interested in investing in prospect cards in hopes of finding that great deal on a prospect like some of the guys we're talking about here that you believe will pop like an Alex Ramirez, or if you want to get nostalgic and think about some of the players from the past, you can find all of that at the Sports Card Investor app. And when you download it today, you can get it at either the Google Play or Apple App Stores completely for free, or you can go to sportscardinvestor.com/locked-on. All right, so let's talk about some of the arms that could be moved for the New York Mets at the deadline when it comes to prospects. Matt Allen, I don't believe is going anywhere. Talked about him a bunch. He's the highest ceiling arm in the Mets system, but he's also been hurt. So I don't know how many other teams are really calling about him right now. You get to the next prospect on the Mets top 30 who comes in at number 9. That's Dominic Hamill. They drafted him in the 3rd round last year, 23 years old, had a 3.84 ERA in 14 games, 13 starts in low A. One of those games, I believe he was coming in after either DeGrom or Scherzer on rehab. I can't remember which one, but he's pitched. It was 63 in the 3rd innings, down in low A, 71 strikeouts during that span, a 1.22 whip. In high A, he's made 3 starts so far, a 3.21 ERA. I really like Dominic Hamill as a guy that can filter into the upper levels of the Mets farm system next year as a starting pitcher. And the Mets just don't have enough of those guys, but those are also the guys that other teams value in trade. So he is someone that I think could be moved. Let's just say you're trying to get a relief pitcher. Maybe you can flip a Dominic Hamill to get that reliever you really want. It would be a lot to give, but that's the type of piece you might have to move here. I wanted to mention Joel Diaz. I don't think he'd move. Number 10 prospect, 18 years old with crazy stuff. I imagine they hang on to him. Calvin Ziegler, I named him as an untouchable on that podcast I did a couple weeks ago, but worth mentioning again, 19 years old, in low A, 2nd rounder in 2021, striking out 14.5 batters per 9 this year. Nasty stuff, really good spin. The Mets love him, so I don't see him moving. I put him right in that same category as Alex Ramirez, as guys that other teams are definitely calling on. And if you have to deal them to get that trade that puts the team over the top, it's a poison pill type trade. But I would like to see the Mets hang on to him. You got Jose Budo. He's on the 40-man roster, 24 years old, in Double-A all year, 3.76 ERA, 10.2 strikeouts per 9, and 83 and 2/3 innings pitched. Another guy that I think, kind of like Hamill, is already now actually in the upper levels of the Mets farm system there. And starter depth. You don't want to trade starter depth if you don't have to, but again, other teams call for starter depth. So that's kind of where you are there. You got a couple lottery ticket arms in Robert Dominguez and Junior Santos, 16 and 18 in the Mets top 30, according to MLB.com, both 20 years old. Again, these are guys that other teams will probably value because of the stuff, but they're far away and they haven't had a ton of great results yet. So if you have to trade them, you have to trade them. We talked about Mike Vasile on the podcast with the Locked on Orioles host, Connor Newcomb. He was kind of the replacement when Connor said that he wouldn't think the Orioles would want a Khalil Lee or a Nick Plummer. Number 21 in the Mets farm system right now, an 8th round pick in 2021. 22 years old, had a 1.80 ERA in low A this year, but has had a 5.40 ERA in 6 starts in high A. Maybe you move him now. If he has some value if other teams like him based on what he did in low A. Here he is struggling a bit in high A. I think he's a piece that has some value. Let's just say a kind of a low-end package. It's like Mike Vasile and Hayden Sanger can get you a reliever. I feel like you do that. I really do. So we'll see what happens with him. The final trade piece to talk about is Thomas Szapucki. 3.48 ERA in 16 starts in AAA. Really good numbers there, but he's kind of becoming this 4A guy. 84 strikeouts in 62 innings, so 12.2 strikeouts per 9 as a starter. The walks are high, though, at 4.2. We saw him make one start at the big league level this year. It was an unmitigated disaster. I have felt for a while now his long-term home could be as a relief pitcher. The Mets have not tried that yet. Maybe another team sees some value in him being converted into a reliever, or they think that he could make it as a starter. He actually maybe has more value on the market right now than a lot of these guys because of, being a AAA arm. This is actually a career high for him in innings pitched, but he's starting to prove he can be healthy. At least this season he has. I wonder if he could get a deal done. Maybe he trades Szapucki for that relief pitcher. Maybe it's a Szapucki Sanger package, which I don't think the Mets would have any problems with considering the struggles he's had at the big league level, but more importantly, his issues staying healthy throughout his entire professional career. That's kind of where the Mets are with prospect capital. And I think when you look at it this way, you can see how the Mets maybe struggle to compete with teams like the Dodgers or the Astros or whoever else who continually churn out prospects that teams trust because their player development is so good. They're able to make a lot of trades where the Mets system is pretty top heavy still. It's getting a lot better. Everyone believes they had a really good draft, but it's going to take a couple good drafts and a lot of good international spending to get the farm system to the point where you can really wheel and deal like you would like to, similar to a team like the Dodgers. But what I want to do after a word from our sponsors here is get into a series preview real quick. Mets versus Marlins. Got to capitalize here against one of the worst teams in this division. The last time the New York Mets played the Miami Marlins, it was Keith Hernandez jersey retirement weekend. The Mets lost that series. The only game they won was the game that Keith got his jersey retired. And if you remember, the Marlins kind of handed them that one. So there's no way that we can just sit here and say, hey, the Mets are going to roll through this Marlins team. You never know what happens. But since that series, the Marlins are 6-9 in their last 15, 47-52 on the year, 14 and a half games back of the Mets. Not going to compete in this division, barely clinging to the wild card race. Jazz Chisholm likely out for the year with a back injury. I think they're about to fold up shop and sell. And with morale down, this could be an opportunity to go into Miami and force them to be sellers. Go out and sweep them, So far this year, the Mets have won 7 of their 11 games against the Marlins. They have these 3 in Miami. They have 3 in New York starting on September 9th, and then 2 more that will be played in Miami at the end of September. You look at the pitching matchups, and it's really interesting because game 1 is decided. The starters have been announced. Chris Bassett versus Sandy Alcantara. You never like your chances going up against the front runner for Cy Young. So the Mets had their work cut out for them then, but the following 2 games, it's TBD right now for the Marlins. They have not announced the starter as I record this at about 4:45 here on Thursday. Don't know what the deal is with that, but if you look at where they would slide in, considering the last turn in the rotation, it would be Trevor Rogers on Saturday, Pablo Lopez on Sunday, but both of them could be out of the rotation for completely different reasons. For Rogers, it's because he's been bad this year, 5.85 ERA after being the runner-up in the Rookie of the Year last season. Really struggling. A left-handed pitcher, so the Mets are kind of hit or miss against lefties, but I think against this particular lefty, considering his numbers this year, you can maybe draw some walks, work counts, do what the Mets do, give great at-bats, and force him into some uncomfortable positions and really do some damage. And that might be why the Marlins don't start him. If they do start him, he'd be going up against Carrasco, and then Taijuan Walker would start on Sunday. That could be a really good pitching matchup if the Marlins throw Pablo Lopez out there. But because they might sell, and Lopez could be the big piece for them, a guy that can get them a haul, he could be the best starting pitcher available. I know that you had Tariq Skubal for the Tigers, who just got put on the market a little bit. So we'll see. Maybe he becomes the top arm. We've been talking for a long time about Luis Castillo and Frankie Montes as the top 2 arms. Lopez, to me, is right there with those guys with an extra year of control. So if you're the Marlins, maybe time to sell him, try to get some hitters, whether it's MLB ready guys, whether it is, prospects that you really like. They need to improve that lineup long term. They have a surplus of pitching prospects. This could be an opportunity to reset a little bit. You trade your number 2 starter when his value's at absolute, peak. You still have Alcantara locked up. You're building around him. This could be the time to get some value there. And if that is the case, do you really want to risk injury throwing him out there or even risk a bad performance against a Mets lineup that can be dangerous? You could see the Marlins say, you know what? We're going to field offers on Lopez, so we're going to push his start back until the other side of the deadline. Not saying we're definitely moving him, but just in an abundance of caution because we really want to see what we can get for him. We're going to hold him out. That could happen. And if that does happen, advantage Mets for whoever they throw out there. And if that's the case, if you're talking about potentially 2 spot starters or Trevor Rogers in a spot starter, this is a series where the Mets really got to win those last 2 games. Game 1, no harm or no shame, I should say, in losing to Alcantara. But if you can take that one, absolutely have to win this series, could sweep this series. This is another opportunity for the Mets team to continue to try to separate themselves from the Braves, who just continue to play really good baseball. They're playing the Diamondbacks this weekend in Atlanta. They just came off of a series against the Phillies where they ended up losing 2-3. So that impenetrable team maybe has some warts there. After the Diamondbacks, the Braves will play the Phillies again for a 2-game set, and then it'll be that 5-game series, Mets versus Braves, starting next Thursday with a doubleheader on Saturday. A lot to talk about when it comes to that next week, but that's going to be all for this edition of Locked on Mets this week on Locked on Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked on Mets. Thank you for making Locked on Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked on MLB, hosted by Paul Francis Sullivan. Locked on MLB is where you want to go to stay up to date with everything going on in Major League Baseball. You follow Locked on MLB wherever you get podcasts.